Every Sunday morning, like clockwork, my husband would wake up early, make breakfast, and gently nudge our sleepy 6-year-old son out of bed. He'd kiss me on the forehead and say the same words every time: "We're going to visit my parents, babe. Be back by dinner." And I never questioned it, not once. For over a year, I believed it. No suspicions. No red flags. Just a picture-perfect routine that made me feel like we were a normal, happy family. But deep down, something was quietly changing. And the truth I'd discover would tear through everything I thought I knew about my marriage. Because the place they were going every Sunday wasn't his parents' house at all. Sunday mornings had a rhythm of their own in our house. The kind that feels comforting, predictable, even safe. I would usually still be half asleep, the soft sound of my husband moving around the kitchen acting like a gentle lullaby. The smell of scrambled eggs and toast would drift into the bedroom, and I'd smile, knowing he was making breakfast for our son before their weekly visit to his parents' house. It was his tradition, not mine. He started it shortly after our son turned 5. He'd say things like he should know his grandparents, or it's good for him to have family roots. And I agreed. It made sense. I liked the idea of our boy having that connection. And honestly, I appreciated the quiet alone time. Those few hours on Sunday gave me space to reset, do laundry, scroll through my phone, maybe even catch up on sleep. They never stayed too long. Just 3 or 4 hours. Always back before dinner. My husband would come in, holding our son's hand, both of them laughing about something silly. A story about Grandpa's garden, or how Grandma made the best cookies in the world. Sometimes they'd come back with leftovers. I didn't question it. I didn't need to. Everything looked perfect from the outside. I remember once, I offered to go with them. It wasn't anything serious, just a casual suggestion. "Maybe I'll come with you guys next weekend," I said while folding clothes. He paused, just for a second. Then he smiled. "Of course, babe, if you want to." But that weekend, he suddenly claimed his parents weren't feeling well and they canceled the visit. The next Sunday, the routine resumed, without me. Still, I brushed it off. I had no reason not to trust him. After all, it was just a visit to his parents, right? There were no signs. No strange behavior. No late-night calls or odd messages. Just the familiar rhythm of eggs sizzling in the pan, my son giggling as he got dressed, and a kiss on my cheek as the front door clicked shut behind them. Week after week, the same gentle routine played out like a scene in a perfectly written script. Until one day, something small shifted. It started with the smallest things, barely noticeable at first. A forgotten detail here, a mismatched story there. Harmless on their own. But somehow, they began to stick in my mind like tiny thorns. One afternoon, I was tidying up the living room when my son came running in, full of excitement. "Mommy, Daddy let me play with a puppy today." I smiled, thinking maybe my in-laws had gotten a new dog. "Oh, Grandma and Grandpa have a puppy now?" I asked. He stopped, tilted his head, and said, "No, we went to a lady's house. She had the puppy." It was a strange moment. Just a few seconds. I felt a flicker of confusion, but I quickly brushed it off. Maybe they stopped by a neighbor's place. Or maybe he just imagined it. Kids mix things up all the time. But then, a week later, it happened again. I was sitting on the edge of the tub, watching our son splash in the bath, when he said, "Daddy says his friend makes better cookies than Grandma." I laughed. "Who's this friend?" I asked. He shrugged. "The pretty lady with the big smile. She lets me pet the puppy." That flicker of confusion turned into something heavier. I didn't say anything to my husband that night. I just lay awake next to him, listening to the rhythm of his breathing, wondering why there was suddenly a lady in the picture. The next Sunday, I paid closer attention. As they were getting ready, I casually asked, "Hey, should I pack something for your mom? Maybe those blueberry muffins she likes." He paused just a beat too long before answering, "Nah, she's on a new diet. No sweets." That didn't sound like his mom. She had the world's biggest sweet tooth. I knew it. I'd baked with her plenty of times. But again, I let it go. Maybe he was right. Maybe she was trying to eat better. Still, the feeling lingered. I started to notice how he avoided details about their visits. How he no longer shared little stories, like he used to. Before, he'd come home talking about his dad's projects or the neighbor's nosy cat. Now, it was fine or nothing special. And he never took pictures anymore. That bothered me more than I admitted. He used to snap cute photos of our son playing in the backyard or sitting in his grandma's lap. Now, weeks had passed, and I couldn't remember the last time he showed me anything from those visits. I told myself not to overthink it, that I was just being paranoid. But the unease was becoming harder to ignore. ND, for the first time since our son was born, I felt like there was something I wasn't supposed to see. By the fifth Sunday, my thoughts had stopped whispering. They were louder now, tapping at the back of my mind like a leaky faucet I couldn't turn off. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was something else. Something heavier. A slow, crawling suspicion I didn't want to admit out loud. That morning, I moved through the house like I always did. Made coffee. Sat at the kitchen table with a magazine I didn't read. My husband packed the diaper bag with snacks and wipes, humming lightly under his breath. He kissed my cheek like usual. Said the same words, the same tone, the same smile. Back by dinner. But I didn't smile back. I watched from the window as they walked down the driveway. He buckled our son into the back seat, his movements calm and practiced. I waited until I heard the engine fade down the street. My heart was thudding not fast, but steady, like it knew something I didn't want to believe. I threw on a hoodie, grabbed my keys, and slipped out the door 10 minutes later. I didn't have a plan, really. Just instinct. I stayed a few cars behind, far enough that he wouldn't notice in his rearview mirror. I'd never done anything like this before. It felt strange. Wrong, even. Like I was breaking some unspoken rule between husband and wife. But that rule had already started to feel cracked. We drove farther than I expected. Past his parents' neighborhood. Past the grocery store we usually stopped at. Into a quieter part of town I didn't recognize. The houses were older, spaced apart with long driveways and trees that looked like they'd been growing there for decades. Then he turned. Slowly. Into a cul-de-sac lined with only 4 houses. I pulled over around the corner and turned off the engine. My palms were sweating, and I suddenly noticed how hard I was gripping the steering wheel. I cracked the window, letting the cool air hit my face. He parked in front of a pale blue house with white trim. Not his parents' house. Not even close. I watched as he got out, unbuckled our son, and walked up the stone path like he'd done it 100 times before. The front door opened before they even knocked. And there she was. A woman I'd never seen before, but somehow felt like I knew. She was holding something, a dish, maybe? She bent down to hug our son, and then she looked up at my husband. Her smile said everything. It wasn't just familiarity. It was comfort. Warmth. A history you couldn't fake. The kind of look that holds too many memories to explain in a single sentence. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just sat there, engine off, hands frozen on the wheel. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't looking at a mistake. I was looking at a choice. I stayed in the car longer than I thought I would. Maybe I was hoping I'd misunderstood something. That they were just stopping by, dropping something off. Maybe this woman was a cousin I'd never met, or an old family friend helping out with something. I held onto those explanations like they could erase what I was feeling. But explanations don't stare at your husband the way she did. After a few minutes, I finally got out of the car. Slowly. My legs felt shaky, like they didn't quite belong to me. I didn't have a plan. I wasn't thinking about what I'd say or how I'd explain showing up like this. I just needed to see more. I needed proof, not the kind that came from suspicion, but the kind you could see with your own eyes and never forget. I walked up the sidewalk, staying close to the trees. Their porch was wide and open, the kind without any railing, just a couple of chairs, a swing, and flower pots that looked hand-planted. The front door was still open, just a screen between me and whatever was happening inside. I heard laughter. Not just any laughter. My husband's. The kind I hadn't heard in a long time. And then hers, light, warm, familiar. Like they were remembering something only the two of them understood. I moved closer. Inside, they were sitting at the kitchen table. The woman was pouring lemonade into 3 glasses. My husband leaned back in the chair, one arm resting behind hers on the bench, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Our son was on the floor with a small dog, laughing, completely at home. And then she reached over and touched his hand. Not by accident. Not casually. It was the kind of touch that carried meaning, unspoken words, old memories, something private. He didn't pull away. In fact, he smiled at her in a way that twisted something in my chest. That smile wasn't mine anymore. I hadn't seen it in months. I took a step back, heart pounding now. I didn't want to make a scene, not with our son there. But standing outside that house, watching the man I married sit so comfortably with another woman, his first love, I realized something quietly devastating. This wasn't something new. It had been going on for a while. The comfort between them, the unspoken ease, the way he blended into her world like he never left it, it was all too familiar to be recent. And I had no idea how long it had been happening. How many Sundays they'd spent like this while I folded laundry, made tea, and waited for them to come back. My stomach turned. I backed away from the porch, careful not to make a sound. The truth wasn't loud or messy. It was quiet. Still. Sharp in its simplicity. And once I'd seen it, I couldn't unsee it. I didn't go back inside right away. I couldn't. My hands were trembling, my breath too shallow, too quick. I stood by the side of the car, feeling like the world had turned into something unrecognizable, something foreign. When I finally pulled myself together enough to drive home, the house felt empty. I didn't know if I was expecting him to come in and act like everything was normal or if I was bracing for an argument. Either way, the silence felt too heavy. I didn't say anything at first. I just went through the motions, putting away my bag, making a pot of coffee, pretending like I didn't know what I'd just seen. He came in a little later, holding our son's hand, just like every Sunday. His smile was wide, like it always was. "We had a great time," he said, his voice light. "Mom made lasagna. You should have come with us." I didn't answer. I just stood there, staring at him. The same man who had kissed me good morning, who had promised me he'd be back by dinner. The man I'd trusted with everything. He looked at me then, his smile faltering. "What's wrong?" The words caught in my throat, but I pushed them out anyway. "Where were you really today?" He paused, confused. "What do you mean?" I stepped closer, the anger slowly replacing the hurt. "I saw you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I saw you with her." His face went blank for a moment, like he hadn't heard me right. Then he let out a nervous laugh, shaking his head. "What are you talking about?" "I followed you," I said, my words getting sharper, more direct. "I saw you with her. At her house." He froze, his eyes darting away. The way he looked at the floor, he was trying to hide something, trying to avoid the truth. "Listen," he said quickly, raising a hand. "It's not what you think." "It's not what I think?" I repeated, the disbelief starting to seep into my voice. "You're sitting there, holding her hand in her kitchen, laughing together like you've never stopped." "That's not what I think." He swallowed, his eyes shifting uncomfortably. It's not like that. I promise." I felt a rush of frustration, the truth pushing against my ribs. "Then what is it like? Tell me, because I'm struggling to understand how I'm supposed to believe you." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't think it was going to turn into this." The way he said it made everything worse. It wasn't an apology. It was an excuse. A way to make me feel like I was the one who didn't understand. "You didn't think this would hurt me?" I asked, the words almost too heavy to get out. You didn't think that our son deserved to know the truth? He looked at me then, really looked at me, but there was something cold behind his eyes. It's not a big deal, okay? It's just nostalgia. A piece of my past. That's all it is. My breath caught in my throat, and I could barely stop the sharp laugh that escaped. Nostalgia? You're telling me that's all this is? His face twisted, like he was trying to form the right words. I never meant for it to happen this way. I love you, okay? I do. But I needed to see her again. Just to get closure. I stared at him, the betrayal settling deep in my chest. He didn't get it. He couldn't see how this wasn't about closure. This wasn't about fixing anything. It was about him making a choice. Choosing her, choosing that part of his life. I couldn't even look at him anymore. My heart felt too heavy, too full of something I didn't know how to name. I didn't want to hurt you, he repeated, as if that would make a difference. But nothing he said could undo what I'd seen, what I knew. The truth wasn't something he could deny anymore. There was a long, uncomfortable silence between us after he spoke. I stood there, my hands pressed against the counter, trying to keep myself steady, trying to breathe through the shock that was still rattling my chest. But his words, his excuses, they kept circling in my mind, growing heavier with each passing second. Nostalgia. Closure. A piece of my past. I couldn't stop thinking about the way he looked at her. How easily he slipped back into the old rhythm, the way he touched her arm and smiled without hesitation. It was like a switch had flipped inside of him, and suddenly I wasn't enough. I took a step back, my eyes welling with tears that I refused to let fall. Is that it? I asked, my voice quieter now, almost defeated. Is that what this was about? You needed to see her to feel something I can't give you anymore. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. I wasn't sure if he was trying to find the right words, or if he was just realizing that this conversation wasn't going the way he expected. I didn't mean to hurt you, he said again, like that would change anything. I shook my head, my vision blurring, the weight of the betrayal sinking deeper into my bones. You've been seeing her, haven't you? Not just Sundays. You've been seeing her in secret, lying to me, to our son. The words came out like a painful confession, but they were the truth. He didn't speak for a moment, and then his silence broke, as if all the guilt he'd been holding inside finally pushed its way out. Yes, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. But it's not what you think. It was never about us. I felt a wave of nausea rise in me, the idea that he'd been hiding something this big from me for so long. He had been lying to my face every Sunday, every week, acting like he was doing the right thing when all along he was choosing her. You were always so busy, he continued, his voice cracking slightly. And I didn't want to burden you. She was the one who understood me. From before. She's the one I could talk to without feeling like I was walking on eggshells. I never meant for it to go this far. The way he spoke made me feel small, like my life and everything I thought I knew was something I was supposed to be ashamed of. So, what, you just kept going back to her? Without even telling me. I could barely get the words out, the pain in my chest too much to contain. He nodded slowly, his face hard to read now. I didn't know how to stop. I didn't want to hurt you. But we've been talking about things. And I couldn't just walk away from it. I felt like the ground beneath me had shifted, like everything I thought was solid and safe had been pulled out from under me in one swift movement. The man I married wasn't the man standing in front of me now. This was someone else entirely, a stranger wearing his face, speaking in his voice, but hiding pieces of himself that I had never known. You're telling me that I wasn't enough? The question slipped out before I could stop it, and it sounded so raw, so vulnerable, that it made me want to shrink away from even asking. But the truth had been laid out in front of us, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I'm sorry, he said, looking pained. I never wanted it to be like this. I thought I could keep it separate. But now everything is just a mess. I never meant to hurt you. But those words, never meant to, felt empty. They didn't change the fact that he had hurt me, that he had chosen to betray everything we had built. the trust we shared, the life we'd promised to each other. I swallowed hard, refusing to let the tears spill. I don't know who you are anymore, I whispered, the reality of it crashing down around me. His face softened, but it didn't make any difference. I'm sorry, he repeated, his voice breaking this time. I never meant for any of this to happen. But I couldn't listen to apologies anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that everything would go back to normal. He'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and no matter how many times he said sorry, the truth was already set in stone. It didn't take long for everything to come crashing down. What had been a quiet, simmering tension between us exploded into something far messier, far louder. And it wasn't just between him and me anymore. It rippled out, affecting everyone. I didn't want to tell anyone, at least, not at first. I wanted to hold it in, to pretend like nothing had changed, like I could still go on with my day-to-day life. But the weight of the truth began to choke me, and I couldn't look anyone in the eye without feeling like I was hiding something. My mother noticed first. She had always been the kind of person who could see past the pleasantries, who could read my face before I even said a word. She asked me about it one evening when I was over at her house for dinner. It was supposed to be a simple family meal. But as soon as she set the wine glasses down on the table, she locked eyes with me, and I knew she knew something was wrong. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice gentle but knowing. "You've been off lately." I forced a smile. "I'm fine, Mom. Just tired, that's all." She didn't buy it. "You sure? You can talk to me about anything, you know." I could feel the walls inside me cracking. It wasn't her fault. She was just trying to help. But I didn't want to burden her with this, with us, with everything that was falling apart. But she wouldn't let me off the hook. "Mom, please," I started, my voice shaking. "I don't want to talk about it." But she pressed. She didn't push too hard, but she didn't let it go. And finally, it spilled out. The truth, raw and unrefined, came tumbling from my mouth. I told her about the Sundays, about the woman, about the way I had followed him and seen everything. I told her about the lies, the excuses, the way he'd tried to justify it all. When I finished, she just stared at me for a moment, her face pale. Then, slowly, she reached across the table and took my hand in hers. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "But you need to tell your father." I couldn't breathe. I didn't want to tell him. I wasn't ready to face the consequences of my own family knowing, but I couldn't hide it anymore. The shame I felt was suffocating. When I did tell him, it was worse than I could have imagined. My father's reaction was immediate and harsh. He slammed his fist against the kitchen counter, his eyes blazing with anger. "That son of a bitch," he muttered under his breath, pacing back and forth. I didn't know what to say. I didn't want him to hate my husband, but at the same time, I couldn't blame him. I felt like I was drowning in the fallout of it all, my parents, my friends, the people who had known us for years, suddenly looking at us like we were strangers. Word got out quickly, as things like this often do. People talk. Family members whispered behind my back. Some reached out, asking if I was okay. Others didn't say anything at all, but I could feel the pity in their eyes. The hardest part was watching my son, my innocent little boy, come home each Sunday with no idea about the storm that had hit his world. He still smiled when he saw his father. He still laughed when he saw the puppy at the house. He still clung to the routine, blissfully unaware of how everything was unraveling around him. I tried to act normal. I tried to keep up appearances for him, but it was becoming harder to hold it together. My heart broke every time I watched him excitedly tell me about the day, about the lady and her puppy, about the things he'd seen. I couldn't bear the thought of him getting caught in the middle of it all. And then, of course, the inevitable happened. My husband's family got involved. His mother called me one afternoon, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "I've heard some things about the two of you, and I need to know if it's true." I took a deep breath, the weight of everything pressing down on me again. I told her everything, every detail. And when I was done, there was silence on the other end of the line. A long, uncomfortable silence. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "But you have to understand, he's always been so lost." I never thought it would get this far. It wasn't the apology I wanted. It wasn't what I needed. But it was the truth, wrapped in sympathy. She'd known something was off, but she hadn't known the extent. Just like me. Just like everyone else. The fallout wasn't just about the betrayal anymore. It wasn't just about the lies. It was about family, relationships, trust that was shattered, and a world that felt like it was crumbling at the edges. After everything exploded, after the conversations with my parents and his family, I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down into an abyss. The truth hung over me like a storm cloud, heavy and unrelenting. I wasn't sure what to do next. I didn't know where to go from here. Everywhere I looked, there were reminders of how everything had changed. The house we shared, the life we built, it all felt like a distant memory, something I couldn't touch anymore without feeling the weight of his betrayal pressing down on me. The man I thought I knew, the man I had married, was now a stranger who had taken pieces of my heart and scattered them to the wind. I couldn't talk to him anymore. The words I wanted to say felt like they were locked behind a wall, and every time I tried, the conversation twisted into more lies. More denials. More excuses. So, I decided to take a step back. To find some space, away from the accusations, away from the noise, away from the people who had their own opinions about what I should do. I didn't go to work that week. Instead, I took long walks, just trying to clear my head. I needed to think. To really understand what had happened, not just what I thought had happened. The anger I felt wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to heal the wound, to make sense of everything that had unraveled. I walked through the park one afternoon, the cold air biting at my skin. The trees were bare, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. It was peaceful in a way, the stillness almost comforting. As I walked, I let my mind wander, but it kept returning to one thought: what now? I needed clarity. I needed to see everything for what it really was, not just through the lens of my hurt, but through the lens of reality. I had to strip away the pain and the betrayal and just look at the facts. Why had he done it? What had driven him to go behind my back like that? Was it really just nostalgia like he'd said? Or was there something deeper, something he hadn't been willing to share with me? I couldn't answer those questions on my own. I knew that. But I needed to. I needed to understand why. Without that understanding, I wasn't sure I could keep going. As I sat on a bench by the water, watching the ripples break against the shore, I thought about all the moments I'd brushed off over the years. The little things that hadn't seemed important at the time. The late nights when he'd been distant. The Sundays that had felt off even before I knew where he'd really been. Had it been building up all along? Had I missed the signs because I didn't want to see them? I hated myself for not paying closer attention, for not listening to the whispers in the back of my mind that had told me something was wrong. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't have all the answers. And maybe I never would. Maybe the clarity I was seeking wasn't something I could find through questions or reflection. Maybe it had to come from within me, from deciding what I was willing to accept and what I wasn't. From finding my own strength to move forward, with or without him. But at that moment, it still didn't feel like the right time to make that decision. The hurt was still too fresh. The betrayal too raw. So I stayed on the bench for a while longer, breathing in the cold air and letting my mind settle. Maybe the answers would come. Maybe not. Either way, I knew one thing. I couldn't keep living in the shadows of the life we used to have. I had to find my way forward, whether he was by my side or not. I stood at the crossroads, and for the first time in a long while, I wasn't sure which direction to take. It wasn't about the house or the marriage anymore, not really. It was about me, about what I could live with, what I could carry in my heart. Every day felt like I was walking through a fog. There were moments when I thought I might be able to push through, to put the pieces back together and find a way forward. And then there were other moments, like that morning when I woke up, alone in our bed, the space beside me cold, that reminded me of everything I'd lost. My husband, the man I loved, wasn't who I thought he was, and I wasn't sure I could find him again, even if I tried. He'd crossed a line that couldn't be erased, and I had no idea how we could rebuild from here. But there was also the family we had created. The little boy who looked at me with eyes full of trust, the life we'd built, the shared history that had once felt so unshakable. Could I walk away from all of that? I wasn't sure. How could I be? I could hear his voice in my head, asking me to forgive him, telling me it wasn't as bad as it seemed, that it was just a mistake. But I couldn't forget what I had seen, what I had felt when I watched him with her, when I saw him laugh in a way I hadn't seen in years, with someone else. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that we could move past this, that we could find a way back to each other. But the reality was harsher than I could have ever imagined. There was no easy fix. No simple sorry that would make everything better. And yet, there was still a part of me that wanted to try, that wanted to believe in the man I had married, the man who had once been my best friend, the father of my child, the one who had promised me forever. Was that worth saving? Was it worth risking my heart again, knowing that it could break all over? Every day, I thought about it. Every night, I wondered if I had the strength to move on, to walk away, to build something new. But even the thought of that felt overwhelming. I had no idea what life would look like without him, without our family, without the man I had trusted. But then I would think about him, his voice, his touch, the way he had betrayed me. And I'd feel the anger bubbling up again. How could I go back? How could I forgive him? The hurt was still too fresh, still too real. He had taken something from me that I wasn't sure I could ever get back. And then there was the question of trust. Could I ever trust him again? Could I ever look at him and see the man I had married instead of the stranger who had lied to my face? Could I ever let go of the feeling of betrayal, of the broken pieces of my heart that he had shattered so carelessly? It felt like the world was pulling me in two different directions. On one hand, there was the life I had known, the life I had fought for. And on the other, there was the unknown, the possibility of a future without him, a future that felt uncertain, but also full of potential. Each day I stood at this crossroads. I could go back to him, try to rebuild, try to forgive. Or I could walk away and find my own path. It wasn't a choice anyone would want to make. It wasn't a choice I was ready for. But I knew that the longer I stayed stuck in the middle, the longer I ignored the decision, the harder it would be to move forward. I couldn't stay here forever. I had to choose. But not yet. Not today. The choice hung over me like a storm cloud, dark and heavy, threatening to break at any moment. Every time I thought I might have found some clarity, the wind shifted, and I was back at the beginning, questioning everything. I woke up every morning with a knot in my stomach. The routine that had once been comforting now felt like a chain, binding me to a version of my life that I no longer recognized. My thoughts were a swirl of confusion, anger, and longing. The tension between us, between what I wanted and what I had to accept, made it feel like I was walking through quicksand, unable to move forward or back. I found myself asking the same questions over and over. Was it worth it? Was I willing to go on, knowing everything that had happened, or was it time to let go? Could I forgive him? And if so, could I trust him again? Was love enough to patch the cracks in our foundation, or had they already split too wide? I spent days wrestling with these thoughts, but they never seemed to lead me to an answer. I couldn't talk to anyone. I couldn't even talk to him. His apologies, his explanations, they didn't reach me. They felt like empty words, as though he was trying to convince me of something he didn't even believe himself. I wanted him to show me that he was sorry, to prove that he truly understood what he'd done. But all I saw was his regret for getting caught, not for the betrayal itself. And then there were the quiet moments, the ones that crept up when I least expected it. The moments when I saw him in a new light, when I remembered the man I had fallen in love with, the one who used to make me laugh, the one who promised me the world. That man still existed, somewhere beneath the layers of mistakes and pain. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe that we could find our way back. But was that enough? Could I keep fighting for a love that felt like it was slipping away, or should I walk away and find my own peace? I thought about my son. His innocence, his joy, and the way he looked at his father with such trust. He deserved a whole family, didn't he? But could I give him that knowing what I knew? Could I be the one to hold everything together when I felt like I was falling apart? One afternoon, I sat by myself in the living room, staring out the window. The world outside was moving, people going about their lives, their routines, while I was stuck in this moment of indecision, unable to see beyond the fog. I thought about everything we had, our history, our love, our son, and wondered if it could all be rebuilt, if the damage could ever truly be repaired. I ran my fingers through my hair, feeling the weight of the decision press down on me. There was no guidebook for this. No manual to follow. No way to know what the right choice was. All I had were the pieces of my heart, scattered and fragile, and the overwhelming need to make sense of it all. I stood up, pacing the room, feeling the walls close in around me. I wanted answers. I wanted to understand why he had done it. I wanted to know if he still loved me, if he was capable of loving me the way I needed. But I knew that even if I got those answers, it wouldn't make the decision easier. I would still have to choose. I thought about all the ways he had let me down, about the Sundays, the lies, the secrets. And yet, I also thought about the years we had spent together, about the memories that still lingered in my heart like faint echoes. Could I let those go? Could I let him go? I was standing on the edge of something, and I didn't know which way to jump. The road ahead was uncertain, full of risks, and part of me was terrified of what would happen if I took the wrong step. But I couldn't stay here forever. The choice had to be made. And so there I was, caught between the past and the future, between what was familiar and what was unknown. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep living in this limbo. It was time to make a decision. And whatever happened, I would have to live with it. Rebuilding wasn't a word I had ever considered applying to my marriage. It seemed too optimistic, too final in a way that suggested there could be a clean slate, a perfect recovery. But as the days passed and the dust of the confrontation settled, I realized that rebuilding wasn't about erasing the past. It was about trying to find a way to live with it. I started by taking small steps. I didn't want to rush anything. It felt like every decision, every word, carried more weight than it used to. I had to be careful, measured. It wasn't just my heart I was trying to protect anymore. It was the fragile remnants of the life we had built together. The house was quieter now. There were moments when the silence felt suffocating, when I missed the way we used to fill the space with laughter, with shared plans, with the comfort of just knowing we were on the same team. But there were also moments where the quiet felt like a reprieve, a chance to hear myself think. We started communicating again, but it wasn't easy. It never was. Every conversation felt like stepping on broken glass. The trust between us was gone, and every word had to be measured, carefully placed. I was cautious of his promises, cautious of his sincerity. I couldn't afford to believe in something that wasn't real. But he tried. I'll give him that. We began to talk about the small things first, the things that had once been second nature, what groceries we needed, who would pick up our son from school, where we would go for family outings. The trivial things, the mundane. It felt like we were trying to rebuild the framework of our life, brick by brick, without the luxury of forgetting the cracks. There were days when I wanted to give up. Days when the weight of everything seemed too much to carry. When the memory of his betrayal would flood back, and I would wonder if it was worth it. But then there were other days, moments, really, when I would catch a glimpse of him in a way I hadn't seen in months. When he would do something small, something thoughtful, and I would remember the person I had fallen in love with. It was hard to trust that those moments were real, but they were there, hiding behind the pain, behind the distance. We started going to therapy. I had my doubts at first. I didn't want to air out our dirty laundry to a stranger, to let anyone else see how broken we were. But the therapist gave us a space to talk about what had happened without the weight of our anger clouding everything. She helped us untangle the mess of our emotions and slowly, step by step, begin to understand the root of the problem. It wasn't just the affair. It was everything. The distance that had grown between us, the unspoken resentments, the things we had neglected. The affair was just the catalyst that exposed everything we had been ignoring. And little by little, we started to rebuild. We found a new way to communicate, to listen, to ask for what we needed without fear of judgment or dismissal. It wasn't perfect. Nothing was ever going to be perfect again. But we were starting to understand each other in a way we hadn't before, in a way that didn't rely on blind trust, but on understanding and honesty. There were setbacks, of course. Moments when we slipped, when the old patterns crept in and we found ourselves back at square one. But I had learned that rebuilding wasn't about perfection. It was about progress. It was about acknowledging the flaws and learning to work with them, not expecting them to disappear. We spent more time together, real time, not just passing through each other's lives. We made an effort to be present, to pay attention to the small things that had once mattered. We took walks, went to the movies, tried cooking dinner together. Simple things, but they helped to reconnect us in ways that felt genuine. But the real challenge was within me. I had to rebuild my own sense of self, of trust. It wasn't just about forgiving him. It was about forgiving myself for letting things get so far. It was about accepting that I couldn't change the past, that I could only move forward. That even though the cracks in our relationship were deep, they didn't mean it was irreparable. Some days I felt stronger than others. Some days I doubted everything. But slowly, I began to feel like I was finding my way back, not just to him, but to myself. And I realized that rebuilding wasn't about making everything the way it was about finding a new way to move forward, together, with the knowledge that everything had changed, but not necessarily for the worse. Co-parenting wasn't something I had ever really considered, at least not in the way I was now being forced to. Before everything fell apart, we were a unit, a family. The idea of splitting that up, of dividing the responsibilities of raising our son, seemed foreign. We had done it all together. Now it felt like I was walking a tightrope, unsure of what the future would hold and constantly questioning whether I was doing it right. At first, we tried to keep things civil. For him, for our son, we agreed to put on a united front. We coordinated schedules, made sure we were both there for the important events, and even shared some of the tougher days when we both had to step up. It wasn't easy. Every time we interacted, there was an undercurrent of tension, of everything unsaid hanging between us. But we tried. We both knew that our son needed consistency, stability, and love, even if we couldn't provide that from the same home. There were days when I felt like I was doing it alone. I would pick up the pieces after a long day of work, managing everything, the dinner, the homework, the bedtime routine. Some nights, I'd look across the table at our son and see the sadness in his eyes, the questions he hadn't asked, the uncertainty about why things felt different now. He didn't understand what had happened between us, and I couldn't explain it to him in a way that wouldn't shatter his world. So, I kept things light. I made sure he felt safe and loved, no matter what. But there were moments when it felt like my world was coming apart. We'd go to parent-teacher conferences, and I'd run into him there, standing beside me like nothing had changed, pretending like everything was fine. It wasn't. It couldn't be. The cracks in our relationship, in our lives, were too wide to ignore. But we still had to show up. We still had to pretend, for him. The hardest part was when our son would ask questions, simple ones, like why Daddy wasn't home for dinner anymore or why we couldn't go to the park as a family. I didn't have answers. I couldn't give him the answers he wanted without tearing his heart apart. And I wasn't sure if I could handle that. Some days, I would sit on the couch with him and try to make it feel normal, try to act like nothing had changed. But nothing felt normal anymore. And then there were the weekends. Sundays, to be specific. I had become hyper-aware of the fact that he would take our son to visit his parents, a routine I had once thought of as a harmless tradition. But now, those Sundays felt like another reminder of how fractured everything had become. The guilt of not being able to offer the same stability, of not being able to give our son the picture-perfect family that I had once promised him, weighed on me heavily. There were moments when I would see the affection between them, the way our son would run to him, his arms open wide, so eager to be with his dad. The way he lit up when his father walked into the room. It was a reminder of what I had lost, of what we had both lost. But it also forced me to confront the reality of what co-parenting meant for us. It meant sharing him. It meant learning how to navigate our new roles, to respect each other's time and space, despite the distance between us. We started working out a schedule, one that was as flexible as possible, but that never seemed to be enough. There were always moments of friction, times when our son wanted to spend more time with me, or times when I would struggle to keep it together when he wasn't around. It wasn't just about sharing the responsibilities of being parents. It was about learning how to do it without completely losing myself in the process. He would call during the week, checking in, asking how things were going, and I could hear the unease in his voice. I knew he was trying. I knew he wanted to be there for our son, to show that he still cared. But every conversation, every exchange, felt like a negotiation. A balance between being parents and figuring out how to be anything more than strangers to each other. There were also the moments when we both had to let go, when he would take our son for a weekend trip, or when I would get a few hours to myself to breathe. At first, those moments felt like freedom, a chance to escape the pressure of everything. But as time went on, I realized how much I missed the role I had once played in our family, how much I missed the unity we had before. I was learning how to be a single parent, but I was also learning how to let go of the image I had of the family I thought we would be. The hardest part was trying to find a way to make it work. I didn't know if we could truly co-parent and still heal from everything that had happened. I didn't know if we could ever find a new normal that didn't feel like we were just going through the motions. But one thing was certain: every day we tried. Every day we made small steps forward, even when it felt like we were taking 2 steps back. There was a time when I thought my life was set. I thought I had it all figured out. Marriage, family, home, everything was neatly in place. But when everything fell apart, when I was forced to confront the cracks in my life and heart, I realized how much I had neglected myself in the process. In the whirlwind of building a family, keeping a home, and trying to maintain a happy marriage, I had forgotten to nurture the person I was outside of all of that. I had let my own needs and desires slip into the background, thinking that as long as everything else was okay, I was okay. But I wasn't. It took me a while to accept that. At first, I was consumed by the pain, the anger, the betrayal. I didn't know who I was anymore, not without the roles I had defined for myself as a wife, a mother, a partner. Everything felt like a loss, and I was struggling to pick up the pieces. The guilt of not being the perfect mother, of not being able to keep my family intact, gnawed at me every day. But slowly, something shifted. It started with the small moments when I would take a step back, breathe, and remember that I was still here. That despite everything that had happened, I was still worthy of happiness. I started reading books again, something I hadn't made time for in years. I rediscovered old hobbies that had once brought me joy but had been pushed aside in favor of responsibilities. I started going for walks by myself, clearing my head, feeling the world around me without the weight of everyone else's expectations. It wasn't about forgetting what had happened or pretending it didn't hurt. It was about learning to live alongside the pain, to acknowledge it without letting it define me. I began to understand that personal growth wasn't a destination, but a journey. A messy, complicated journey that didn't always look the way I expected it to. I started setting boundaries, something I had never been good at before. I realized I didn't have to carry everything on my shoulders, that I didn't have to be everything to everyone. I could prioritize myself, my mental health, my well-being. It felt foreign at first, like I was being selfish, But then I realized that self-care wasn't selfish, it was necessary. The therapy sessions helped too. Not just for us as a couple, but for me individually. Talking to someone outside of the situation gave me perspective. It helped me to see that my worth wasn't tied to his actions, that I didn't need his validation to feel complete. It wasn't about fixing him or the marriage, it was about healing myself. The more I focused on my own growth, the more I realized that I could still thrive, with or without him. I began to take more risks. Small ones at first. I made decisions without overthinking, without waiting for permission from anyone else. I started saying no when I needed to, without feeling guilty. I asked for help when I needed it, and I allowed myself to receive it. It felt freeing, like I was shedding old layers of myself that no longer served me. There were moments of doubt, of course. Moments when I questioned whether I was doing the right thing, whether I was strong enough to make it through. But those moments were fewer as time went on. I started to trust myself again. I started to see my own strength, the resilience that had always been there, even if I hadn't recognized it before. Through all of this, I also came to understand that growth wasn't linear. There were days when I felt like I had taken 2 steps forward, and other days when I felt like I had taken 10 steps back. But I didn't let those setbacks define me. I learned to forgive myself for the days when I struggled, when I felt weak or lost. I realized that growth didn't mean being perfect. It meant continuing to move forward, no matter how small the steps were. As I worked on myself, I began to see the changes in my relationship with my son. I was able to be more present for him, more patient. I was less distracted by my own pain and more focused on his needs. I learned to let go of the guilt that came with being a single parent, knowing that I was doing the best I could. I wasn't the person I was before everything happened. And I wasn't the person I had been during the hardest parts of it. I had become someone new, someone stronger, more self-aware, and more at peace with who I was. I realized that personal growth wasn't just about healing from the past. It was about embracing the future with open arms, ready to face whatever came next with a renewed sense of self. It wasn't something that happened overnight, this sense of newness. It was subtle at first, like the first hints of spring in the air, a warmth that slowly crept in as the days grew longer. But there was no dramatic moment where I suddenly felt like everything was okay or like I was starting fresh. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about accepting it and finding a way to move forward, despite the scars it had left behind. I started with small things, little steps. I redecorated my bedroom, not with any grand plans, but just enough to make it feel like mine again. I cleared out old memories, things that reminded me of who I used to be, the version of myself that no longer fit. The room felt different, lighter, as if I was shedding old skin. Each change, each decision, felt like I was reclaiming a piece of myself, making room for something new. I also started making plans for the future, things I hadn't thought about in years. Travel, hobbies, things I had put on hold because I was too focused on being a wife and a mother. Now, I was allowing myself to dream again. It was a strange sensation, one I wasn't used to, but it felt good. I realized that I had the power to shape my own life, to make choices for myself without anyone else's approval or expectations. The weekends were still challenging. Sundays, in particular, still held the weight of what used to be a reminder of the family dynamic that had shattered. But I was learning to redefine what those days meant. I started spending them with friends, doing things I enjoyed, reconnecting with parts of myself that had been neglected. Sometimes I would take my son to the park, just the 2 of us, and we would talk about the things he liked, the things that made him laugh. It wasn't the perfect family day I had once imagined, but it was ours, and that was enough. I started going out more, not on dates, but simply to enjoy life. I would meet up with friends, go to new places, explore the city. I hadn't realized how much I had closed myself off, how much I had isolated myself in the past. Now, I was learning to let go of that fear, to embrace new experiences, and to allow myself to feel joy again. It wasn't always easy. Sometimes, the emptiness would creep in, a reminder of everything that had been lost. But each new experience was a small victory, a sign that I was moving forward, piece by piece. There was also the decision to focus more on my career, to build something for myself. For so long, my life had been defined by my role in the family, by what I could offer others. Now, I was looking at the possibility of building something just for me, something that wasn't dependent on anyone else's needs or expectations. It felt empowering. I took on new projects, honed my skills, and started thinking about the direction I wanted my life to go in. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about proving to myself that I could thrive, that I could be more than just a wife or a mother. As time went on, I found myself becoming more comfortable with the idea of change. It wasn't something to fear. It was something to embrace. I realized that the person I had been before the affair, before the betrayal, wasn't the person I had to be going forward. I was allowed to evolve, to grow, to become someone new. And in doing so, I could let go of the anger, the hurt, and the resentment that had once consumed me. Even my relationship with him began to shift. It wasn't the same as before, of course. We weren't the same people we had been when we first met, when everything had seemed simple and effortless. But we were learning how to coexist, how to parent together without the weight of past grievances clouding every interaction. We were slowly rebuilding a foundation of mutual respect, a new kind of understanding. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress, and that was enough for now. There were days when the past felt like a shadow, hanging just behind me, reminding me of where I had been. But more often than not, I found myself looking ahead, excited for what the future could hold. There was something freeing about knowing that I had the power to choose, to carve out a new path, to build a life that reflected who I was now, not who I used to be. I was no longer defined by the mistakes of the past, by the broken promises, or by the pain that had once consumed me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control again, like I had a say in my own future. And that, more than anything, was the beginning of something new. Closure was something I had always believed to be a single moment, a decisive conversation or event that would tie up the loose ends of the past and allow me to move on completely. But the reality of closure was far more complex than that. It wasn't a single conversation, nor a final goodbye. It was something that happened gradually, in the spaces between the pain and the healing, in the quiet acceptance of things that could never be undone. I had spent so much time waiting for a definitive moment, for him to apologize in just the right way, for the pieces to fall into place and explain everything that had gone wrong. I had expected that once I had the answers, I would feel whole again, that the hurt would simply vanish. But it didn't work that way. The truth was, I had to make peace with the fact that I might never get all the answers I wanted. And even if I did, it wouldn't erase the past. It was an uncomfortable realization at first. It meant letting go of the hope that there was a perfect resolution to our story, that everything could be fixed with one final gesture. And that was hard, because for so long, I had been holding on to that hope. It was easier to believe that closure came from someone else giving me what I needed. But the reality was, closure had to come from within. The first step in that process was acceptance, accepting that things had happened the way they did, that the pain was real, but so was the strength I had found in the aftermath. There was a part of me that still wanted to rail against the unfairness of it all, to demand justice, to make him understand the depth of the betrayal. But as time passed, I realized that it wasn't about him anymore. It was about me and how I chose to move forward. In the weeks and months that followed, I began to see closure as a series of small moments. It was the day I stopped replaying the past in my head, when I no longer thought about the affair and the lies with the same intensity. It was the day I started living in the present, no longer burdened by the weight of what had happened. It was the day I felt okay being alone, without the need for validation from anyone else, knowing that I was enough just as I was. There were days when he would reach out, trying to make amends or offer explanations, but those moments felt more distant now. I was no longer looking for him to fix things, to somehow restore what we had lost. I had learned that closure wasn't about reconciliation or finding a way to go back. It was about accepting what had been and finding peace with it. I could forgive him, but that didn't mean we would ever be the same. I remember one evening, sitting alone with my thoughts, and it hit me. I was no longer angry, no longer consumed by resentment. The tightness in my chest had loosened, the constant knot in my stomach had unraveled. It was the first time I truly felt free, not from the past, but from the hold it had on me. I realized that I had been waiting for something outside of myself to give me closure when, in fact, it was something I had to give myself. It wasn't always easy. There were still moments when the old pain resurfaced, when the past crept in unexpectedly. But each time it happened, I was better equipped to handle it. I learned to sit with the discomfort, to let the emotions flow without letting them define me. I learned that closure wasn't a clean break, but a gradual process of healing and release. And then, there was the moment when I finally let go of the bitterness. When I stopped seeing him as the source of my pain and started seeing him as a person who had made mistakes, just like anyone else. It wasn't about excusing what had happened, but about finding the space to acknowledge that we were both flawed, both human. In that moment, I realized that I could release the last of the anger, the resentment that had held me captive for so long. It wasn't about forgiving him for his sake, it was for mine. It was the final step in reclaiming my peace. There would always be reminders of the past, echoes of the person I used to be. But with each passing day, I could see less of the weight of it on my shoulders. Closure didn't mean erasing the past. It meant finding the strength to live beyond it, to allow myself to move forward without being anchored by it. I wasn't the person I was before the affair, before the betrayal. But I was becoming someone stronger, someone who understood that closure wasn't something given to me, but something I created for myself. It was a journey, not an event. A journey that had taught me the power of letting go, the importance of self-forgiveness, and the freedom that comes with choosing to heal. As we come to the end of this story, I hope you've found some part of it that resonates with you. Life can throw unexpected challenges our way, and sometimes it feels like the pain will never end. But as we've seen, healing is possible. Growth, forgiveness, and finding peace within ourselves is the path forward, even when it feels impossible. If you've been through something similar, know that you're not alone. There's always a way to move forward, to find your own strength, and to rebuild your life on your terms. Remember, closure doesn't come from others, it comes from within. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more, don't forget to hit the like button. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more emotional stories and life lessons. Your support means the world to us, and we'd love to have you join our community. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.